What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Magicka Warden. So the Magicka Warden got a slight indirect buff from the changes that were made in Wrathstone, particularly from the Ancient Knowledge passive buff, or I should say change. So the Ancient Knowledge passive no longer requires you to have a Destruction Staff ability slotted in order to gain the special effects from the Fire Staff or the Lightning Staff. So that came as a buff to Magicka Wardens because now we no longer needed to have something like Crushing Shock or Ellie Drain or some other destructive ability on our front bar, allowing us to basically load up our front bar with Animal Companions abilities, which basically gave us an additional 3% damage done. So a small buff that was a result of this change here. So Magicka Wardens are still not very popular when it comes to Magicka DPS classes, mainly because of this kind of misconception that they don't do very good DPS. Magicka Wardens, while they aren't going to be matching up to Magicka Nightblades anytime soon, they are still capable of pulling very good DPS nonetheless, especially in the right hands. So Magicka Wardens, even though they kind of have this reputation of being very, very bad DPS, they are still capable of pulling enough DPS to clear all the content in the game. So it's just a matter of how much you want to work towards kind of perfecting the Magicka Warden. Magicka Warden is actually my favorite Magicka DPS class to play. So if you guys ever see me DPS, you'll often see me playing as a Magicka Warden. One, to kind of prove a point that Magicka Wardens are still a very viable class option, but also because I just find the class itself very fun to play. The rotation is quite dynamic, and I really enjoy playing kind of the Magicka Warden DPS. So just like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, basically everything you need to know to basically recreate this build. We'll talk a little bit about gear substitutions that you might want to make here. So there are a couple of different sets that you might want to consider picking up, either kind of due to situational usefulness or just because you don't have access to the DLCs or the expansions that these sets come from. So we'll go over a little bit of that. We'll then talk about the rotation itself, and then we will demonstrate the rotation on a 6-man dummy parse so you guys can get an idea of the amount of DPS that we're able to pull with a Magicka Warden. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So the gear pretty much has remained unchanged between Murkmire and Wrathstone. There have been no new sets that have been introduced that kind of supplant any of the current meta sets here. So pretty much whatever set that you have been running in Wrathstone pretty much are going to remain exactly the same. There are a very small changes here and there that you might want to consider making, but overall nothing much has changed gear-wise between Murkmire and Wrathstone. So Monster Helm set is still Zaan, and we're still doing 5-1-1, so we still have 5 light, and then our Monster Helm set is medium and heavy. So that hasn't changed at all. Zaan is still the strongest Magicka Monster Helm set in the game right now. It does require you to be within melee range though, so that's kind of the downside of running Zaan here. This does come from Scalecaller Peak, so you do need to have access to the Dragon Bones DLC in order to get this set. Now, if you don't have access to Zaan, but you're still able to play within melee range, there is a base game set that you can run instead, and that's going to be Grothar. So Grothar, you can get this from Vaults of Madness, base game dungeon, pretty easy to complete, and this is going to be the strongest base game Monster Helm set for you to use if you're playing within melee range. If you have to play at farther than melee range, so if you have to play a ranged DPS spec, then you want to go with a different Monster Helm set because Zaan and Grothar will not obviously be able to do their damage at range. At this point, you're going to want to run Valken Skoria instead. This is probably the best Monster Helm set for you to use as a Magicka Warden, mainly because you don't have any shock damage to proc Alambris. So Skoria, you can get this from City of Ash 2, so this is another base game set, so a little bit harder to obtain because City of Ash 2 is one of the hardest base game dungeons in the game, but it is still a set that you should pick up because chances are you will have to play at range in order to play as a Magicka Warden. So just make sure to pick up Skoria. Now, if you don't want to run Skoria because that one piece doesn't really add too much for DPS, you can also go with 2 different Monster Helm sets that have Spell Crit as part of their one piece. So that would be something like Zaan and Slimecraw, or Slimecraw and Iceheart, if you have access only to base game stuff. So there's another option there as well. So for example, you could get the Zaan Shoulders, and then you can run something like Iceheart Helm instead, so you have 2 spell crit pieces there. That is another viable option if you're playing at a ranged DPS set here. So you can go with just 2 different Monster Helm sets that each give you spell crit. That is an option instead of running Skoria, and it is actually probably going to be a little bit stronger than Skoria in certain scenarios. Now for our body set, we're going with Siroria here. Again, nothing much has changed. It's still the perfect version here. You still want it on your body at all times. So this can be obtained from Cloud Rest, so you do need to have access to the Somerset expansion in order to use this set. This is still going to be the strongest set in the game right now for Magicka DPS, assuming that you're able to maintain at least a fairly decent amount of stacks on Siroria. So anywhere between like 5 to 10 stacks is going to put Siroria on top of a lot of other sets in the game. However, if you don't have access to Somerset, so you can't get Siroria, whether that's the perfect version or the imperfect version, there are some other sets that you could run instead. So other sets you could run on the body, let me see if I can find all of them. The Burning Spellweave, this is a set that you can wear either on the body or as a front bar set, and we'll go over kind of the difference between the two of them in a little bit. This is a base game set, get it from City of Ash, so you can do City of Ash 1, City of Ash 2, doesn't really matter. City of Ash 1 is easier to farm, so this again can be on the body set, body or the front bar set. Now with Burning Spellweave, you will see, generally speaking, a little bit lower uptime compared to on a Magicka DK, so you're probably going to see anywhere between a 55-60% uptime on that 5-piece effect. So that's just something you want to bear in mind there. Magicka Wardens don't have any other native source of fire damage. See what other sets are there. Healing set, tech set. I'm sorry, I have a lot of sets that I have to find. Okay, Master Architect. So this is another expansion set. So you will have to have access to the Morrowind expansion in order to get this set. So this is a light armor set that you can get from Hollis Replication, which is the trial there. So this is particularly useful on a Magicka Warden because your ultimate that you're mainly going to be using is going to be the Bear ultimate. And that only costs 75 ultimate to use. So it's a very cheap ultimate. The only two ultimates that are cheaper in the game right now are Crescent Sweep, as well as Soul Harvest from the Magicka Templar and the Magicka Nightblade, respectively. So this is a very good option to run, mainly because, unlike with Crescent Sweep and Soul Harvest, you can actually use the Bear at range. So you can actually give Major Slayer to 2 range DPS, versus if you were to run this set on a Nightblade or a Templar, you would only be able to give them to people within melee range. So if you do have to play at range and you have other range DPS, Master Architect is a very good set to have. You will be giving up some personal DPS if you are going to run this set, but you will be boosting 2 other people's DPS, which will usually end up giving a group DPS buff. In fact, in almost all scenarios, running a Master Architect set will give a group DPS buff compared to the amount of DPS that you would be losing as a result of using this set. So I highly recommend, if you are a Magicka Warden, to pick this set up. It's going to be very, very useful for you to run. Mother's Sorrow is another set that you might want to consider running. It's going to obviously go on the body because the 5-piece is a static bonus, so it's best to put on the body. You could feasibly run this as a front bar set, but it's going to be more effective as your body set. Now, Wardens, unlike Templars and Nightblades, don't have additional 10% Magicka crit damage, so it's not going to be quite as strong on a Magicka Warden as it would on a Magicka Nightblade or a Magicka Templar, but it is still a pretty strong set nonetheless, so I would recommend you pick this up. Very easy set to obtain. It's a light armor set that's dropped from the Zaan, so you can farm it yourself, or you can buy it off of guild traders. Necropotence is another set that you might want to consider running as a Magicka Warden, especially if you're using the Bear pet, because the Bear does count as a combat pet, so it will activate that 5-piece bonus there. So this doesn't really give you any sort of additional spell damage bonus outside of the passive boost that the Max Magicka bonus will give to your tooltips there. So Necropotence is a very strong set now that the 5-piece is also affected by CP. It's not going to be quite as strong as Master Architect or Siroria, but it is a very easy set to obtain. It's a base game set. It's a dropped set from Rivenspire, so you can farm it yourself. You can buy it off of guild traders. It's a very easy set to obtain as well. I would probably say run Necropotence before Mother's Sorrow if you're in that position where you have to choose between these 2 sets here. And that, I believe, is pretty much it for that's pretty much it for all the sets that you could run on the body here. Now for our front bar set, we're going with Spell Strategist. So this is a PvP set that is in the base game. So you can either PvP, get it from Rewards of the Worthy, those coffers you get every 20k AP, or you can buy it off of guild traders. I have the Jewelry and the Inferno Staff front bar here, but you don't necessarily need to run this as a front bar set. So like I mentioned earlier, Burning Spellweave is a front bar set. You can run Master Architect as a front bar set. So you don't have to run Spell Strategist as a front bar set, but it is the best kind of set you want to run if you can have access to it. So this is a light armor set, so you don't have to run 3 jewelry like I have here. You can run any combination of Spell Strategist, jewelry, and body pieces, as long as your second set, you have that jewelry active. So for Siroria, for example, it's a little bit more difficult to get perfect Siroria jewelry, so in most cases you'll run perfect Siroria armor pieces and then Spell Strategist jewelry instead. And so, like I said, Spell Strategist front bar here, and then again, you can run either Burning Spellweave or Master Architect. Those are two very good front bar sets that you might want to consider running as well. Mechanical Acuity is another set that you might want to consider running as a front bar set. This is a crafted set from Clockwork City, so you will need to have access to that DLC if you want to craft it yourself. Otherwise, you can either pay someone to make it for you, or you can buy it off of guild traders. So it does require 6 traits in order to know how to create a Mechanical Acuity set here. But because of the buff to the Shadow Abundance, Mechanical Acuity also got an indirect buff because it basically gives you 100% chance to crit. So the increased crit damage from Shadow pairs very well with Mechanical Acuity. So Acuity is very strong in this patch. It's not going to be the best, but it is definitely up there. It's very, very competitive with Spell Strategist as a very potent front bar set here. One final set that I also want to mention here as a body set is going to be Julianos, the tried and true Julianos. So this is a crafted set from Hrothgar, 6 traits, so either you can craft it yourself if you have access to the Hrothgar DLC, or you can buy it off of guild traders, or again, pay somebody to make it for you. 5-piece bonus is a static bonus, it's 299 spell damage, so you will have to wear this on the body. It's not very good as a front bar set here. Now for our weapons, traits, and enchants here. So I have a Maelstrom Inferno staff on the back bar. If you don't have the Maelstrom Inferno staff on the back bar, you can just double up on your front bar set. So you can do double Spell Strategist Inferno, for example. You still want to have infused on both of your weapons. There is some argument for a precise front bar, but generally speaking for Magicka Wardens, it's very difficult to kind of hit that point where precise will be stronger. You're going to need to run something like Mother's Sorrow in order for precise to kind of be useful or to beat out infused. You basically need to do a certain amount of DPS in order for precise to beat out infused, and Magicka Wardens just really aren't capable of kind of meeting that DPS mark there. So double infused is going to be the way to go for Magicka Wardens. Flame damage enchant on the front bar. We have an Absorb Magicka enchant on the back bar. Now, if you are able to sustain, you don't need to run an Absorb Magicka enchant. Obviously, you can run a shock damage enchant instead for single target DPS, or a weapon damage enchant for more cleave damage. But Magicka Wardens do have a little bit of an issue with sustaining, so I do recommend picking up an Absorb Magicka enchant if you're in a group where you're not able to get orbs on cooldown. If you're running something like Witch Mothers or Clockwork Citrus Fillet and you're getting orbs pretty much on cooldown, you should be able to sustain a full light attack rotation that way. But I still would recommend starting off with an Absorb Magicka enchant and then determining whether you have the ability to sustain, and then swap the enchants out accordingly. For jewelry, traits, and enchants, all spell damage, all Bloodthirsty here. The Bloodthirsty still does not affect the Bear ultimate, so you will not be getting the full benefit of Bloodthirsty, but it does still affect the rest of your damage, so that's why we're running it. If you don't want to run Bloodthirsty, you can run Infused instead. Infused is going to be stronger than Arcane from Magicka DPS, so you can run Infused or Bloodthirsty, any combination of those two traits there. Now, for our armor, traits, and enchants, all divines, all Max Magicka enchants. You can go with infused large pieces if you would like. The DPS difference between them is going to be very, very minimal. We're talking about less than half a percentage point in terms of ability metric calculations. So it's really whatever trait you happen to get first. If you happen to get divines first, run divines. If you happen to get infused first, you can run infused. And there will be very, very little DPS difference between the two of them. Moving on to our character sheet, I am a Dark Elf. Dark Elves are one of the best races when it comes to Magicka DPS. Other Magicka DPS races that you might want to consider running. The Ulthmer are going to give you the strongest amount of DPS as a pure Magicka DPS. They get 2000 Max Magicka and 258 spell damage. Dark Elves are very, very close behind at 1875 Max Magicka and 258 spell damage. Now, depending on kind of how you play, whether you play PvP or not, the Ulthmer get some stamina back whenever they use a class ability, so that you have a little bit better stamina regen. If you want to also play as a stamina DPS on the side, so if you want to maybe respec into a stamina warden at some point, Dark Elves also get 1875 max stamina and 258 additional weapon damage. So Dark Elves are very, very good at kind of being a hybrid race. If you want to spec into a stamina DPS later on down the line, I would recommend going with a Dark Elf. Now, another race you might want to consider running is going to be the Bretons. So the Bretons have 2000 Max Magicka, and they get 7% cost reduction to all of their Magicka abilities. So their sustain is absolutely through the roof. Bretons are a very strong magic DPS race just because of that sustain, which allows you to basically run shock damage enchant with pretty much no regards to kind of sustaining. That 7% additional cost reduction combined with something like Witch Mothers or Clockwork Citrus Fillet that gives you very powerful sustain. There's been reports that Bretons are able to run blue food in trials with a shock damage enchant. That's how strong the sustain is. So Bretons are a very powerful option there. Additional sustain basically allows you to use your light attack rotation for a longer period of time, so you don't have to use heavy attacks, which is a DPS loss. The last race I do want to mention here is going to be the Khajiits. So the Khajiits get 10% additional crit damage and 825 additional Max Magicka stamina and health. So Khajiits, very similar to Dark Elves, do fall in this sort of like hybrid race where they're able, if you do want to eventually at some point maybe spec into a Stamina Warden, Khajiits are also a good option there. So those are your primary different races that you might want to consider running as a Magicka DPS. Attributes, all points into Max Magicka, no surprise there. Of course, you can put some points into health if you want a little bit more swappability. It's kind of up to you. Me personally, I would not recommend putting more than 10 points into max health, because at that point you're really kind of giving up too much when it comes to Max Magicka, which is a direct boost to your DPS. Now, for our Mundstone, we're going with the Thief here. Because we're running Siroria and Spell Strategist, we have lower crit than usual, which means the Thief is going to be stronger than the Shadow here. You can run the Shadow if you would like. The DPS difference between the two of them with this particular setup is going to be fairly small. We're talking maybe like 1% or so. If you're running something like Mother's Sorrow instead, you will want to run the Shadow instead, because the Thief does give you a little bit less return, a little bit less DPS if you have already high crit chance from running Mother's Sorrow. So if you're running Mother's Sorrow at all, just swap over to the Shadow. You can really pick whichever one you want, Thief or the Shadow. DPS difference between the two of them is going to be pretty small. Now I am running Parse Food, so this is Ghastly Eyeball, which only gives me Max Magicka and Magicka Regen. In an actual raid, you would be running Witch Mother's Potent Brew or Clockwork Citrus Fillet. This food basically allows me to mimic getting orbs on cooldown when I'm doing my parse. So this is considered parse food because of that. So just bear in mind that your health will be higher, your Max Magicka will be a little bit lower, and your regen will be a little bit lower in an actual raid because you'd be running Witch Mothers or Clockwork, not Ghastly Eyeball. Now for our skill bars, starting off with our front bar here. Pretty much I've loaded up our front bar with all the abilities from the Animal Companions line. So you have Screaming Cliff Racer, Deep Fissure, Fetcher Infection, Blue Betty, Bird of Prey, and Eternal Guardian. And on our back bar, this is where we'd put our shield. So I have Elemental Drain for the parse, but this is where we would put either Morph of Annulment, Harness Magicka, or Dampen Magic. Dampen Magic will give you the larger shield. Harness Magicka will give you a little bit of Magicka back when you get hit by spell damage. So again, Ellie Drain is just for the parse. Winter's Revenge, Blockade of Fire, Rearming Trap, Bird of Prey, double bar this for the Minor Berserk on the back bar as well, and Eternal Guardian. Now, if you happen to have access to the Sigil Order skill line, if you're playing at range, you can't use Rearming Trap, in which case you would be running Channeled Acceleration instead. So depending on whether you're able to be within melee range or not, you will be swapping the skill out with either Channeled Acceleration or Rearming Trap. Now going over our champion point distributions. So the CP cap has remained unchanged between Murkmire and Wrathstone. So our CP cap is still 810, which gives us 270 points to put across each of our different constellation types here. Starting off with our green CPs, we have 75 into Arcanist, 75 into Tenacity, which gives us 120 points to really put into the remaining nodes however we feel. So I have 40 Shadow Ward, 40 Tumbling, and 40 Warlord. If you want, you can push Arcanist and Tenacity up to 100, which will give you 70 points instead of 120 points to play around with the other nodes. For our blue CPs, I have 72 into Elfborn, 64 into Elemental Expert, 25 into Spell Erosion, 9 into Staff Expert, 66 into Master at Arms, and 34 into Thaumaturge. And finally, for our red CPs, this is a one-size-fits-most approach, so this is not going to necessarily optimize your mitigation across any single piece of content, but it will give you good enough mitigation for all pieces of content. So I have 81 into Ironclad, 61 into Thick-Skinned, and 64 into both Hardy and Elemental Defender. Alright, so that is pretty much it for all of the build information, so now let's go ahead and talk about our rotations. Let's actually pull out our 3 million dummy here so we can kind of show you guys what is up with our rotation. So, like most Magicka DPS, you will be running a dynamic rotation, which basically means you will be kind of staggering your dots a little bit here, and that's kind of a natural consequence of running a Magicka Warden because our dots do last differing amounts of time. So for example, Fissure Infection lasts for 10 seconds, but Blockade lasts for 8, and Winter's Revenge lasts for 12. So you will need to offset these a little bit here, and that basically just helps maximize dot uptime, which gives you the most amount of DPS with the least amount of drain. Now, the ability that we're going to be kind of centering our rotation around is going to be Deep Fissure. You can think of this as basically a 3-second dot. So you basically cast Deep Fissure, and you can treat it as a 3-second dot, and then you need to recast it once it is over. Now, the way the global cooldowns work in this game, you're able to basically do this. You can cast Deep Fissure, then you can cast 2 active abilities, or a heavy attack and an active ability, and then you can cast Deep Fissure again. So basically your rotation is going to be centering around this sort of rotation. So it's basically Deep Fissure, 2 abilities, Deep Fissure, 2 abilities, Deep Fissure, 2 abilities, and so on and so forth. That's kind of the whole kind of rotation of a Magicka Warden. You're basically centering it around Deep Fissure itself. Now, because of all the different stats that you have that have different sort of uptimes, at some point there will be a little bit of downtime between all of your abilities here. So I would say if you have to drop down uptime on any of these abilities here, Fissure Infection would be the one that you'd want to drop uptime on. And that's mainly because Blockade is obviously needed for the Maelstrom passive, Maelstrom ability to work. And then Winter's Revenge is pretty much just as strong as Blockade, if not a little bit stronger, so you still want to make sure to maintain Winter's Revenge here. Fissure Infection is still a strong dot, but it is not quite as necessary to keep up as Winter's Revenge or Blockade of Fire here. So I would drop Fissure first if you have to drop any dot whatsoever. Blue Betty, you also want to try to maintain this for the resource return. This is a very powerful resource tool to have, so I would definitely try to keep Blue Betty up as much as you can here. Alright, so kind of to give you kind of an idea of what a dynamic rotation looks like. So again, we're going to be centering this around the Deep Fissure ability. So it's going to be Deep Fissure, 2 abilities, Deep Fissure, 2 abilities. So you'd want to do something like this. You want to do Deep Fissure, cast 2 abilities, and then do Deep Fissure again. So there will be times where you don't need to re-up a dot, in which case you'd obviously be using Rearming Cliff Racer. But this is kind of the entire rotation here. Now if you do need a heavy attack for whatever reason, you can normally do 1 ability, 1 heavy attack, and basically go straight into another Deep Fissure. So for example, heavy attack into an ability, into a Deep Fissure. So again, if you need a heavy attack, it's do a Deep Fissure, heavy attack into an ability, and then do Deep Fissure again. Alright, so that is basically what your rotation is more or less going to look like. So now we're going to reset our dummies here. Hopefully we don't have any more dots running. And we're going to do a 6-man dummy parse so you guys get an idea of what sort of DPS we can pull on a Magicka Warden. Now, do bear in mind here that Magicka Wardens do have access to Minor Berserk. So Bird of Prey gives us passive Minor Berserk while we have it slotted, and we do have it on both bars here. So just bear that in mind when you want to compare it to other class parses here. So the only other class that has access to Minor Berserk is going to be the Magicka Nightblade. So just take that into consideration when you want to compare it to a Magicka Templar, Magicka DK. We do have Minor Berserk here, so that does give us a little bit more DPS. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. Obviously going to want to start off with your batteries down. As you can see here, it's Shulks and 2 abilities. Shulks and 2 abilities. Try to use your Bear Ultimate when you're on your front bar here, because your front bar will have more spell damage, as you have Spell Strategist on the front bar here. So you just want to make sure that you're using your Bear Ultimate while you're on your front bar to take advantage of the higher spell damage. remember that Bloodthirsty does not affect the bear damage in the execute range for Bloodthirsty. So at this point here, even though Bloodthirsty is affecting the rest of our abilities, it is not affecting the bear attack. So we are not quite getting as much as we could from Bloodthirsty due to this bug. It is a well-known bug, it's been reported many times, and we have received no word on whether this is going to be fixed. Alright, so there we go. That is the amount of DPS you can expect to pull from a Magicka Warden. So again, just remember, we do have Minor Berserk here. So here, Minor Berserk, 100% uptime here. So, 49.7k DPS. Still lower than Magicka Nightblade, but it's still a very respectable number here. So I have pulled a little bit more. I was testing things out a little bit earlier today. Pulled 50.2k with a very similar setup here, and then I pulled 51.4k with a shock damage enchant on the back bar. So this is a little bit inflated due to the minor vulnerability with the shock damage enchant here. So the 50k is probably closer to what you should expect to pull with this rotation here. So as you can see here, these three dots are all very powerful, but Fetcher Infection does the least about, which is why I said if you need to drop any of them for whatever reason, just drop Fetcher Infection instead here. Throw Magicka Enchant does a decent amount of damage here, so it's pretty important to try to maintain that. And you can see here that the bear does quite a lot of damage here. So Swipe is the normal attack that it deals, does a lot of damage there. Crushing Swipe is sort of the slam move that it does. It's basically kind of an AoE attack that it does every now and then. It's also quite strong here. Guardian's Wrath is the actual ultimate use itself. So we had a little bit of bad RNG here because we had some pretty bad crit chance. Only 1 out of 5 of them were crits. So it is something to keep in mind here. But overall, Magicka Warden's very powerful range DPS option here, particularly if you pair it with Master Architect. Being able to give your range DPS Major Slayer consistently is quite a nice boon to have there. So that is it for this build video. If you guys have any questions or comments, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below, and I'll answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.